Hello, this is Michael Lane. Today I will be presenting my PowerPoint presentation on a march to Vicksburg in partial fulfillment of Civil War HI304 for Professor Boardman. The topics that we'll cover in this presentation are the Civil War up to 1863, Ulysses S. Grant, who was the Union general in charge of taking Vicksburg. We'll look at the Western theater of the Civil War and the various battles that occurred there. We'll talk about how Vicksburg, the importance of it, and how it was dubbed the Gibraltar of the Mississippi. We'll also cover a historian who doesn't feel that Vicksburg was as important as others may feel. We'll look at the many failed attempts to approach Vicksburg by the Union forces. We'll take a look at General John C. Pemberton, who was the general for the Confederate forces. We will also look at the amphibious strategy to get to Vicksburg and all the different methods that went into making that happen. After the attack on Vicksburg, we'll look at the Vicksburg siege. We will then talk about the surrender of Vicksburg and the aftermath. The next few slides will look at some of the events as they occurred chronologically leading up to the Battle of Vicksburg. The items in gold represent events that are relevant to the Vicksburg Crusade. And in 1861, some of those things would include the Lincoln blockade of the southern ports, when Grant was promoted to brigadier general, and also in 1861, the first ironclad in the U.S. Navy was launched. 1862 was a year that was very active for the Western theater of the Civil War. Fort Henry and Fort Donelson are taken. Those are Union wins, with Grant leading that charge. Also in 1862, federal troops occupy Nashville. Later, the Battle of Shiloh was a Union win, although a very bloody win for Grant. His reputation was damaged after that win. Next, we have the New Orleans falling to the Union. And then later in November and December of 1862, Grant begins his move into Mississippi towards Vicksburg. Also in 1862, in the Western Theater, we have basically the battle for Corinth, Mississippi. It actually took two different battles to hold that city, a very crucial railroad junction. And then later, we have the USS Cairo, which was a ironclad ship that was sunk on the Yazoo River just north of Vicksburg. So one of the first actual battles related to Vicksburg. In 1863, there's a lot going on the Eastern Front. There have not been very many victories on that part of the war. General Burnside gets replaced by General Hooker. On the Western Front, we're at the time starting from about January through April, where General Grant is going to make various attempts to get to Vicksburg over land, over sea, so on, and we're going to talk about those more in detail coming up. General Ulysses S. Grant was the general in charge of the Union forces at Vicksburg. He was a mediocre student at West Point. He had been a captain in the Mexican War. He had received citations for gallantry and meritorious conduct. He did resign after that war. He had an issue with drinking. He had been stationed in California and was very lonely and missed his wife, and unfortunately had acquired a drinking problem while he was staying out there. He volunteered for the Civil War pretty much as soon as it started. It took him a little bit, but he was eventually promoted to brigadier general. Early in the Civil War, he had wins at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. He was then nicknamed Unconditional Surrender Grant instead of for U.S. Grant. He was caught by surprise at Shiloh. This was a win for the Union, but there were significant losses, lots of casualties. Afterwards, there were many calls for his removal by the press, by fellow soldiers, by fellow officers. Lincoln defends him, says, "I can't spare this man, he fights." Grant's boss, General Halleck, does remove Grant from command. Eventually, he is put back as the commander after Halleck is promoted and moved away from the Western Front. Grant moves troops to Vicksburg. His strategy here has been termed a masterpiece. In the Western theater in the Civil War between 1862 and 1863, we have Forts Henry and Donelson, which were very big victories for Grant. He gained quite a bit of notoriety for those wins. Basically, the Union plan was to get control the inland waterways into Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. There were ironclads as part of these attacks. Grant was very aggressive, whereas his boss, Halleck, was much more cautious. Again, they were Union victories. Grant does gain notoriety. He becomes a very common name. These are wins early in the Civil War when there were not very many wins happening on the Eastern Front. In Shiloh, this was basically, there was not supposed to be a battle at Shiloh. They were on their way to Corinth to basically attack that city and try to gain control of the Union Cross or the railroad crossroads there. This was Grant versus A.S. Johnston and General Beauregard. Grant was caught off guard. He received a lot of criticism for that. They were basically, his men were eating breakfast early in the morning when the Confederate troops snuck up on them and basically caught them very much by surprise. This battle went on for 2 days. There were massive losses on both sides. It did end up a Union win, although the rebels, the Confederates, did escape. Also in this battle, A.S. Johnson does die for the Confederates. Grant is vilified by the press, but Lincoln does defend him. At Corinth, basically the Mobile and Ohio and the Memphis and Charleston Railroad junction was there. In the first battle, basically Grant has been put on the sidelines. His boss, Halleck, leads the forces for the first time in his career. The rebels, they did something kind of sneaky here. They basically tricked the Union into thinking they were being reinforced, although they were actually retreating. And some accounts say that Grant tried to convince Halleck that that's what was happening, but Halleck would not listen. Then eventually Halleck was promoted after this battle, which the Union did win. Next, I'd like to talk about Vicksburg. It was known as the Gibraltar of the West. It was part of Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan, basically to shut off supply of the South by the ocean ports as well as the inland rivers. Vicksburg was a supply and a communication pipeline to the South. Lincoln stressed its importance, saying Vicksburg is the key. The war can never be brought to a close until that key is in our pocket. Confederate President Jefferson Davis also showed the importance of Vicksburg. He said that Vicksburg was the nailhead that holds the South's two halves together. And differing opinion was from famed historian Gary Gallagher. In a speech at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture in 2012, he stressed that, in his view, Vicksburg was not that important. In his view, Nashville and New Orleans were already under Union control. Corinth was under Union control. Uh, at the same time, it must be understood that Gallagher confessed to bias. He really didn't feel the Western theater was important at all. In his view, he felt that the battles around the DC area and Richmond were the most important. Now I'd like to talk about the many failed attempts to approach Vicksburg. In late 1862, in December, a ironclad named the USS Carroll was sent down the Mississippi River and then basically turned upriver to the Yazoo River, just a little bit north of Vicksburg, maybe 10 or 20 miles. The goal of this ironclad was to clear mines on the Yazoo River with the hope that that river could then be used to transport troops and equipment downstream to Vicksburg. The Carroll was commanded by Thomas O. Selfridge Jr. Unfortunately, it cleared mines the hard way by hitting one. The ship was then brought to shore. It was beached, but eventually did slide back in the river and was sunk. There were no casualties. And of interest, this ship is actually on display because it was recovered and reassembled in 1964. In late 1862, we have Grant's advance into central Mississippi to head towards Vicksburg. He gets to Holly Springs only to lose it to Van Dorn's Raiders a month later. This was a pretty, I guess, both embarrassing and critical loss because the Union had made Holly Springs basically a supply depot, and when Van Dorn took that, he basically was able to capture a lot of supplies, and he took as many as they could carry and burn the rest. Also, about this time in late December in 1862, General Sherman is repelled at Chickasaw Bayou. Basically, they were going to float down the Mississippi River and then up the Yazoo River, and did not work out well for them. On a bright note, Generals McClernand and General Sherman later, along with Admiral Porter, do take Fort Hidman. In this attack, over 4,700 Confederate rebels were captured, so one of the rare victories in their amphibious approaches. In February through April of 1863, the Yazoo Pass expedition took place. In a feat of civil engineering magic, the Union engineers breached a levee and flooded a channel between the Mississippi and Tallahatchie rivers. Interestingly, this channel was so shallow before they flooded it that a canoe couldn't even make it through there. So it worked remarkably well. Unfortunately, though, um, the channel did allow access to the Yazoo River, and they were floating their supplies to the Tallahatchie. And as they went downstream on the Yazoo River, Confederates quickly put together a cotton bale and earthwork fort called Fort Pemberton, named after the Confederate general defending Vicksburg, and that was quite effective and caused the Union to basically retreat 2 times they tried to take this fort. In a less effective feat of civil engineering, Grant tried to have several canals built to access Vicksburg. The first was Grant's Canal, also a canal at Lake Providence, and then the Duckport Canal. All of these fail for various reasons as the river rise and fall either flooded or dried out their attempts. Another failed expedition was the Steel Bayou expedition. In this case, they tried to float down the Steel River. Admiral Porter decides to take it upon himself to find a water route to land behind Vicksburg. He basically found the Steel Bayou unnavigable. There were too many impediments. The Confederates had dropped trees in his way. There were overhanging branches. There were areas that were just plain too shallow. And once again, another failed attempt to find a way to get to Vicksburg. Here is John C. Pemberton, who was a Confederate lieutenant general. He actually was born in the North, but his wife, who was from Virginia, convinced him to enlist on the side of the Confederates. He was a poor student at West Point. He had misread Grant's moves. He thought he was moving to Memphis when he was actually coming to Vicksburg. He has been considered a traitor to the South for surrendering Vicksburg, and he finished his career in obscurity. One thing you can say about General Grant was he had a lot of perseverance. In spite of all those failed attempts, he's going to put together another very critical strategy here, and this one involves basically taking a flotilla that is commanded by Admiral Porter and sneaking it by Vicksburg in the middle of the night and running that flotilla all the way down to the Grand Gulf. As part of this strategy, he had a fascinating methods of distracting Pemberton, kind of giving him false items to chase after. Another part of this strategy was that Grant was going to attempt to either build roads or improve roads on the west part of the Mississippi River, and understand that much of this area is swampland and delta, so muddy, wet areas. After the armies were marched south, they would rendezvous with Porter's flotilla, and then the ships would be used to cross the Mississippi River, eventually moving north towards Vicksburg. So the first part of this strategy was Admiral Porter's flotilla. It included 6 ironclads, 1 wood gunboat, and 2 transports to make it past Vicksburg. One of those transports was lost. On April 22nd, another flotilla, this time basically just troops, also make it past Vicksburg. Again, these same ships were used to ferry Grant's men across the Mississippi River. Admiral Porter, his method was basically to have his ships run as close to the shore as possible, in the hopes that the cannon would not be able to reach him. They would not be able to point directly down the hill towards where his ships were coming. It took place on a moonless night excursion, and it happened during a grand ball that was happening in Vicksburg. So there was some strategy on when to do this. It worked pretty well. There were very little Union losses other than that one transport ship that I talked about. Otherwise, it was a successful trip. Just prior to U.S. Grant's land movement and Admiral Porter's river movement downstream of Vicksburg, Grant performs two exceptional diversion tactics. First of all, he will send a cavalry named as Grierson's Raid right through the heart of Mississippi. This raid destroys 60 miles of railroad, telegraph lines. It wipes out many Confederate stores. It also causes looting and pillaging of civilians. In response, General Pemberton pulls his cavalry from the river to pursue, which left basically the shoreline open for Grant's people to land at. Second diversion was basically William Tecumseh Sherman, General William Tecumseh Sherman fakes an invasion at Haynes Bluff, and this also distracts Pemberton from downriver activities. These two diversions were very effective. Grant's plan is to, while these diversions are going on and Admiral Porter is moving uh, people downstream the Mississippi, he's going to march three armies through these basically very swampy, muddy roads on the west side of the Mississippi, really basically taking them through the Mississippi Delta land. The roads, even though they had been improved, were still horrible, very muddy, very wet, wagons getting stuck, mud up over the boots of the soldiers. Uh, Grant moves three armies with very little supply lines over land. They do rendezvous with Admiral Porter's navy. First, they try to cross at Grand Gulf, but General Pemberton of the Confederate forces is able to repulse them there. So they move a little bit farther south to Bruinsburg, and they are easily able to cross at that point. Moving ahead, basically, these armies now that they're at Bruinsport, they do cross over the Mississippi uh, into into the land in Mississippi. They first start at Port Gibson, where there's a skirmish there. They then move up to Raymond, where there's another skirmish. At this point, the armies split up. Some of them go to Jackson, where they basically take the city pretty easily, and then others move to Champion Hill, which is basically where General Pemberton retreats from after they have made a stand at Big Black River. Uh, all of these uh, all of these battles are won by Union forces quite easily. Just a quick overview of these battles. Once again, at Port Gibson, it occurred on May 1st through the 3rd, 1863. Union forces of about 23,000 greatly outnumbered the Confederates, who only had about 8,000 troops. The rebels retreat, with Grand Gulf also evacuated. The Union Army marches to Raymond. At Raymond and Jackson on May 12th, 1863, the Union forces again greatly outnumbered the Confederates, 12,000 to 4,100. At this point, Grant splits columns. Some of them go to Jackson, the others go towards the railroad. Um, Jackson falls very quickly. One of the larger battles in this series takes place at Champion Hill on May 16th of 1863. Once again, the Union forces greatly outnumber the Confederates, 32,000 to about 22,000. Uh, the Confederates are forced to retreat rather quickly. They do attempt to regroup back at Big Black River. This also fails, and after that, they are forced to retreat back to Vicksburg. After Champions Hill, General Grant moves quickly to Vicksburg. General Pemberton retreats into the city. Uh, you can see there are significant forts, earthworks, redans, and redoes. Rebels and citizens are trapped. There's an 8 mile long skirmish line. This circle, as you see, is basically known as the Circle of Fire. Union assaults. They do try to take the city on May 18th and May 23rd. However, they are repelled. Grant on May 23rd decides he's not going to send any more of his troops against what he sees as a pretty reinforced target here, and basically just calls for a siege to spare his Union line. During the siege, Admiral Porter sends up 6 mortar boats upriver from New Orleans. These boats are basically a 13-inch cannon on a raft. They don't have their own propulsion. They're moved by barge. They can send a 204-pound shell with a pound of powder for 2¼ miles. They explode over the city and cause shrapnel to rain down on Vicksburg. During the siege at Vicksburg, Grant attempts to dig a tunnel to the fort that's occupied by the 3rd Louisiana Unit of the Confederate Forces. Basically, it's an engineering exercise. They used miners from the state of Illinois, and they charged this tunnel with 2,200 pounds of black powder and detonated it. Made a huge crater. In this crater, soldiers, the Union and Confederate soldiers, battle for 26 hours straight. Uh, the Confederates had the upper hand. They had the higher positions, so there were quite a few Union lives lost. Eventually, Grant does retreat. On the 47-day siege of Vicksburg begins on May 23rd. The drawing on the left shows a woman who's living in caves with her family during the siege. People had dug caves to avoid the cannons and the shrapnel. By July 1st, conditions inside the city and on the defensive lines were deplorable. At this point, more men were dying in hospitals than at the front. Here's a drawing of the Wisconsin 12th Battery along with the Wisconsin 6th Battery at the Vicksburg. Kind of shows what the encampment looked like. It's from a book that was put together in 1914 that commemorate the Wisconsin activities at Vicksburg. Uh, General Pemberton receives an anonymous letter. It's supposedly from one of his soldiers. It says, "If you can't feed us, surrender us." General Pemberton plans to escape with his army and abandon Vicksburg. However, this plan is found out by Generals Grant and Admiral Porter, who basically put a stop to it. General Pemberton, he hears about a plan that Grant is going to assault on July 6th. At this point, he's lost a lot of troops from disease and starvation. He doesn't wait for this assault. He surrenders on July 3rd. Pemberton proposes an armistice. Grant wants an unconditional surrender. They meet at 3 o'clock on July 3rd, and after several letters, Grant makes a final offer at midnight. Basically, he proposes that the rebels are allowed to keep some of their property. In other words, there was no way he was going to be able to um, capture all 30,000 men. So he allows them to be paroled. This is accepted by Pemberton at midnight, and that's basically the end of the siege. The aftermath at Vicksburg, the Union now controls all the western waterways. For all intents and purposes, the war in the West is over. General Grant continues his command in eastern Tennessee. He's eventually named General in Chief of the Union armies. General Pemberton has been granted a traitor for surrendering. He's doesn't leave the army, but he's left without a command until he eventually resigns. Admiral Porter, who also took a big part in this campaign on the Union side, he's promoted to vice admiral at the end of the war, and eventually in 1870 he's made a full admiral. And here we see on July 15th of 1863 a letter from Abraham Lincoln to General Grant, basically congratulating him for the victory. And obviously Grant's notoriety is much improved after this victory. Here are the sources that I have listed, quite a few of them, many from the American Battlefield Trust, various other places. All of the images were basically from the American Battlefield Trust website, although I do have, I don't know, half a dozen or more that are from other places, and where they are, I note them on the slide itself. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.